In ancient Rome, power was absolute, and so was cruelty. Behind every triumph, every marble building, every emperor and senator stood an enormous population of people whose names were forgotten the moment they were bought. Rome's slaves. They built the empire, they fed it, they entertained it, and when they disobeyed, Rome showed them a darkness few societies have ever matched. Among these millions, the runaway slave, the fugitivus, was considered the most dangerous of all. A runaway was not simply a servant escaping to Rome. A runaway was a threat to order, to economics, and to the fragile image of total control the empire needed to maintain. And what Rome did to runaway slaves is something most history books barely touch, because the truth is far more shocking than most people expect. Slavery in Rome was everywhere. It did not discriminate by race. Anyone could become a slave. Prisoners of war, kidnapped foreigners, people born into slavery, and even Romans who fell into debt. Slaves served in mines, farms, kitchens, temples, workshops, military camps, and in the homes of the rich. Some were educated tutors or secretaries. Others were chained laborers, worked until they collapsed. For many, life was tolerable. For many more, it was brutal. Legally, slaves were not people. They were property. They could not marry, could not testify without being tortured first, and could not refuse any command. If a slave ran away, it was not escape. It was the same as a chair being stolen or a horse breaking loose, and Rome always recovered its property. Why would a slave risk the unimaginable punishments waiting for runaways? The reasons were many. Some ran to escape violent masters who whipped, starved, or tortured them daily. Some ran to flee endless labor in mines or fields where survival was unlikely. Others ran simply because they tasted even a moment of freedom and could not return to chains. But running was almost impossible. Rome had a fully developed system for catching slaves, a network as efficient as any modern surveillance state. Large estates hired full-time slave hunters called fugitiveri. These men tracked footprints, questioned villages, bribed locals, and even used dogs trained to follow scent trails. Throughout cities, public boards displayed notices describing escapees. Masters offered generous rewards, turning every Roman citizen into a potential informant. Inns were forced to check documents. Harbor officials inspected travelers. The night watch patrolled streets, searching for anyone who looked out of place. For a slave whose entire life had been controlled, the world outside was unimaginably dangerous. Almost every path led to someone ready to turn them in. And when a runaway was caught, Rome made sure the punishment echoed through every household, every workshop, every field. The first response was usually a violent beating. Roman whips could tear skin, muscle, and bone. Some slaves survived, some did not. But this was considered the mildest of consequences. Many were branded with a hot iron on the forehead. The mark carved into their skin was the letter F for fugitivus, a permanent symbol of rebellion. It meant that every person who saw them would know what they had tried to do, and that any future escape attempt would bring harsher punishment. Others were chained for life. They were forced to work in shackles, often with other slaves, so close together that movement itself became agony. Many were sent to Rome's mines, places so deadly that Roman writers described them as living tombs. Few who entered ever came out again. But for those who fought back during escape, attacked a master, or inspired others to run, Rome reserved the most terrifying punishment, crucifixion. Crucifixion was not simply execution. It was humiliation, a warning, a spectacle meant to terrify every slave who saw it. Runaways who plotted rebellion were hung along roadsides, their suffering made as public as possible, so that even the thought of escape would disappear from the minds of those still in chains. One of the most disturbing events in Roman history shows just how far Rome was willing to go to maintain control. In 61 CE, a runaway slave murdered his master. According to Roman law, if a slave killed a master, every slave in that household, guilty or not, could be executed. The reasoning was simple and terrifying. The entire household had failed to protect the master, so the Senate ordered all 400 slaves in the home to be put to death. Citizens protested, calling it unjust and barbaric, but Roman law was immovable. All 400 were executed publicly. Rome wanted the world to know that slaves were not allowed to think of rebellion, much less act on it, yet not every escape attempt failed. Some slaves pulled off astonishing feats of survival. One educated slave disguised himself as a free tutor, forged travel documents, and started a new life in another city, teaching wealthy children until someone eventually recognized him years later. Others fled into mountains or forests and joined bandit bands that preyed on Roman caravans. Some lived for years in remote areas where Rome's reach was weak. Border slaves sometimes escaped into lands Rome considered barbarian territory where Roman law could not follow. And then there was Spartacus. His escape from a gladiator school with 70 others sparked the largest slave revolt in Roman history. Tens of thousands joined him. Rome's greatest generals were humiliated by a man who was once considered property. When the rebellion was finally crushed, 6,000 slaves were crucified along the Appian Way. Their bodies stretched for miles, a horrifying reminder that Rome would never tolerate mass rebellion again. To prevent escapes, Rome created slave collars, heavy metal rings locked around a slave's neck. Many were engraved with messages like, "I have run away, capture me, return me to my master." Some had bells attached, so movement made noise. It was surveillance in the most literal form, centuries before the concept existed. Rome feared slave uprisings more than foreign enemies. Slaves vastly outnumbered free citizens in many regions. A coordinated revolt could collapse an entire province. So Rome used fear, violence, and psychological warfare to maintain order. Yet not every slave lived and died in chains. Some gained freedom through manumission, being legally freed by their master. Freed slaves became freedmen, allowed to work, own property, and marry. Some even became wealthy. But for most, freedom came only through years of obedience, luck, or a master's generosity. Escape rarely brought the same result. The story of runaway slaves in ancient Rome reveals a darker truth beneath the empire's glory. The marble buildings, the legions, the grand victories all stood on a system built on fear, a system where the desire for freedom was punished with unimaginable cruelty. And yet, runaway slaves existed. They resisted. They ran despite the consequences. Their stories remind us that even in the harshest systems, the human desire for freedom is powerful enough to challenge empires. The fugitivist, the runaway slave, represented something Rome feared more than anything else: hope. The hope that oppression could be defied. The hope that no chain is unbreakable. And that hope is why Rome punished them so severely. Because if hope spreads, even the strongest empire can crack.